Today we're checking out Carmageddon Rogue Shift on the Steam Deck OLED, and this one is a bit of a nostalgic surprise. Carmageddon is one of those series that a lot of players remember from the late 90s or early 2000s. Back then, it was known for its over-the-top destruction, chaotic races, and the kind of gameplay that felt completely different from traditional racing games. And honestly, I think the last time I personally played a Carmageddon game was back in the previous century. So jumping into this one on a modern handheld like the Steam Deck feels a little surreal. This new entry also adds something the series never really had before, a roguelike progression system where each run lets you upgrade your car and slowly build towards stronger builds over time, and there's even bosses. But the big question is, how well does Carmageddon actually run on the Steam Deck OLED? Let's answer that question. Before we get into performance, it's worth quickly talking about the series itself. The original Carmageddon released in 1997, and it quickly became infamous for its chaotic gameplay and controversial premise. Now, in this game, instead of simply racing to the finish line, players were rewarded for destroying opponents, smashing through environments, and generally causing as much chaos as possible. I remember just running over people and having a blast, and I'm not sure how I was allowed to play that game back then. It was a very different style of driving game compared to the more traditional races of the time. The series went on to release a few sequels over the years, but it gradually faded from the spotlight. I think there was a game released in 2015 or 2016, but I never actually checked that out. So seeing the franchise return again and now playable on a handheld PC like the Steam Deck is actually pretty cool. And surprisingly, the core idea of the game still works, and I still think it's pretty fun to play. Now, the basic gameplay loop here is still centered around high energy car combat and destruction. You're dropped into chaotic arenas filled with enemies, obstacles, and objectives. Instead of simply trying to win races, you're constantly smashing into opponents, dodging attacks, using weapons, and collecting upgrades during the run. What makes this version different is the roguelike structure. Each run lets you unlock new upgrades, modify your vehicle, build stronger setups for future attempts. This means that every run feels a little bit different depending on the upgrades you get, even if you're racing on the same map. Sometimes you end up with a build focused on speed and ramming power, other times you might lean more into survivability or destructive abilities and weapons. That progression system actually adds a lot more replayability than the older games had. Now let's talk about how the game actually performs on the Steam Deck. Overall performance is pretty decent, but it's not really consistent. During lighter moments at the beginning of a race, the game can run at a solid 60 FPS on low settings, which feels great for this kind of fast arcade style action, but once the chaos really starts ramping up, lots of enemies, a lot of effects and collisions happening all at once, performance can drop down to around 30 FPS or even lower. Those drops tend to happen during the most intense moments when there's a lot of happening on screen, and honestly it doesn't feel great when that happens, so while the game can hit 60 FPS, it's definitely not locked there all the time. That said, the game still feels very playable on the Steam Deck, especially once you dial in the right settings. The game offers a few different upscalers, mainly TAA, XeSS and FSR. XeSS also has frame generation. I tested it, I do not recommend using it. When you enable XeSS frame generation, the game starts to feel very floaty. There's noticeable input lag when steering or reacting to enemies or trying to shoot, so I definitely would avoid that. With FSR, it's FSR 3, so there's a lot of shimmering, a lot of the graphics become kind of like hair strands. It doesn't look great. With TAA, it's pretty much the same. It's really not great. Because this game is so fast-paced, none of the upscalers are actually doing a good job. So after testing a few different combinations between the lowest settings or medium settings and upscaling, I think the best combination is to actually turn off all upscalers and reduce the resolution scale to around 80%. The game allows you to reduce internal resolution. So while you keep the same resolution, none of the menus change or anything like that, the actual internal resolution of the game, you can lower that. And you can set that to 80%, and this alone improves frame pacing a lot, and it keeps performance much more consistent during combat. Now, you're not gonna get 60 FPS by doing that, you're gonna get around 40 to 50 FPS, but it actually feels a lot better. You can feel it while driving. And you still see occasional dips during the most chaotic moments, but overall the game feels noticeably smoother this way. And because the Steam Deck screen is relatively small, the lower resolution scale doesn't have a huge impact on image quality, but you don't get the same issues you would with FSR shimmering or with XeSS ghosting or with any of the other upscalers. Now, to make this even more playable, I turned on lossless scaling, and because the game naturally reaches around 40-45 FPS, this is a good candidate for lossless scaling. With lossless scaling 2x frame generation, it actually becomes very, very playable. Most of the time it will sit at 60 FPS, or if you uncap it, it will be between 60 and 75 FPS, but I suggest capping it to 60 for just more consistent results with lossless scaling. And lossless scaling will also introduce input delay. That's just a given, but it's much better than the frame generation alternative that XeSS provides. So my best settings for this is turn off all upscalers, set the game to medium settings, the medium preset, turn on lossless scaling, set the resolution scale to 80%, and you're gonna have a great time with this title on the Steam Deck. Battery life on the Steam Deck OLED comes in at roughly 2 hours and 30 minutes, which is pretty typical for a game released in 2026. It's not the longest battery life you get on the deck, but it's definitely within the normal range for this type of game. The game has full controller support, everything maps cleanly to the controller layout, and driving feels pretty responsive. Even with lossless scaling, menus are pretty easy to navigate, and overall the game adapts nicely to handheld play. It has this kind of pick up and play chaos that actually fits the Steam Deck really well, and runs can be relatively short, so it's easy to jump in for a quick session. So overall, Carmageddon is definitely playable on the Steam Deck OLED. Performance isn't perfectly stable, especially during heavier moments, but with the right settings, the experience is still very enjoyable. With this game, what really surprised me though is how well the core gameplay still works and how fun it is. For a series that I hadn't really touched for like more than 26 years, it's actually pretty fun to jump back in this chaotic style of car combat again, and being able to play it on the Steam Deck makes it even better. That's gonna be it for my review. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like. If you want to see more performance breakdowns and best settings guides, don't forget to join the Steam group and follow the SteamFlow curator page, where I post a text version of all my reviews. If you want to see more Steam Deck, Steam hardware, and general handhelds content, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.